celebration. Simcha, Simcha, celebration of life.
Hello and welcome to Simcha, a celebration of life. I'm your host, Aaron Halevi. In today's show, we go green with the Greenside Shul Community Garden Project, celebrate the establishment of the South African Jewish community, and delve into the meaning of ethics of our fathers. Judaism sees us as the Earth's custodians. We are here to enjoy the benefits of what Mother Earth provides for us. At the same time, we have to ensure this precious gift for future generations. Greening Greenside is an example of this ethos. The Greenside Shul, in collaboration with Greenside resident Prince Baloyi, have established an incredible community vegetable garden on what was once a derelict pavement.
We started planting the garden about a year ago as part of a larger program called Greening Greenside. It's initiated by Greenside Shul, and it was a program around Tu B'Shvat. We also had a learning program called Ethics of Eden, which was run by Lana Stein of the Academy of Jewish Thought and Learning. And it was all about our Torah responsibilities to the environment. And this program, this garden was established by Prince Baloyi in 2010, and it's as part of the Soccer World Cup celebrations. And at that time, a year ago, it was very overgrown and in really serious need of a renovation. So we from the Shul approached Prince to collaborate to renovate his Soccer World Cup garden and to create a community vegetable garden. We were actually inspired, it wasn't our idea, we were inspired by other people's initiatives, which we had heard about pavement vegetable gardens. And we thought this would be a fantastic project as part of our Greening Greenside program and part of reaching out to our local community, and trying to take down the walls around the shul and really participate in our local community.
I started the garden after my job, and then I swear I was coming to sit down and look at the cars when I'm going across here, and then it's where I started picking up papers, bottles, tins, which was like a bush here. So I clean it, and then I cut the grass down. I make the benches so that people can see it, and then the table. And then afterwards, and then I see, people like come and sit here and then keep the place clean. And then it's what I continue doing up until last year.
Prince, really, we couldn't do it without him because he sees to the day-to-day maintenance, and then every now and then we do get some of the kids to come and clear up and weed and everything else. But we plant 4 times a year, and Gentina, who Prince works for, who lives in the house over there, she has very generously offered us water. So she supplies the water which Prince uses to, but we would love to put in a good irrigation system. That would be fantastic. That was sort of conserved water, but more like a drip system. So we are looking into that for the future.
One of the core principles behind the whole project was the idea of community involvement. It would have been relatively simple to employ a professional to come and to plant and to look after the garden. But the idea was really to get the community involved and to teach through their own example of what it means to be part of a greater community and to contribute. We have adults, we have children who come to the garden on a regular basis and plant. And it's really been a wonderful experience to see how people with their own hands and their own involvement can do something for the betterment of other people's lives.
We have a symbiotic relationship with the Greenside Shul, and we do work together, especially around Chagim, where the children are involved in the shul happenings. And this was one of the happenings that Nina put together. We have, at Tu B'Shvat, we did our own little garden at school, and we eat from that little garden. But this was a bigger project, because not only do you plant for yourself, but it is even a greater mitzvah to plant for others and to help others not only eat, but to get nourishment from it as well. And it's a good point for children to learn. Children need to learn to share and be kind. They are that naturally, but when one encourages it and channels it, it becomes even more.
I think it's a mitzvah to plant plants and help other people. If people can't afford to go to the shops and buy something, they can always just come here and take.
You know, this wouldn't sustain hundreds of people, but if everybody did a similar thing. And I suppose the question is like, do you plant flowers which are, you know, just for the eye, or vegetables which can both be really beautiful and also sustain you? You know, so I think if we all had to be conscious of that when we planted our pavements and planted our gardens, then we could really start making a big difference to society.
One of the lessons I think we can learn from this project is that every little piece of land counts. You don't have to have huge tracts of land in order to plant food, in order to feed the community. If we take all the little pieces and we add them together, it can make a really large impact. And so many people, I'm sure, have pavements outside or a small piece of ground that they can utilize for the benefit of the others. We have a sign here that says, help yourself, leave some for others. And if other communities could take an example from this, we could feed so many hungry people.
But I think it's not only about providing food, it's about taking responsibility for one's own environment. And I think particularly living in South Africa where we have, you know, difficulties with municipalities taking care of roads and pavements, and we tend to get so angry about it and sort of feel as if our government is letting us down and it's unfair because we're taxpayers and we should be serviced better. But I think at the same time, if we had to take on responsibilities, particularly on a local level, you know, your pavement is your pavement, your street is your street, and if somebody else is being able to, you know, and if everyone had to make a problem that easy to solve. I think it's you know, very much Jewish attitude about taking responsibility, seeing your own accountability, and not just sitting back to others to do it. And yeah, I think it would make a big difference. Not only from providing, I know, can't keep ourselves to save the world, but it's more an act of being part of taking the pillars of your society and being part of the city of problems.
Welcome back. This year marks the 175th anniversary of the South African Jewish community, and over the next few months, we will be celebrating this amazing milestone. In the early 1800s, a handful of Jews arrived with the Dutch East India Company when religious freedom was granted by the Dutch colony. These pioneering individuals were instrumental in establishing the beginnings of a Jewish community. In 1841, this service was held in the home of Benjamin Nordin, but it wasn't until 1863 that the first built synagogue, Tikva Yisrael, was erected.
There have been two major waves of Jewish immigration to South Africa. The very first group to arrive were Britain. They were slightly wealthier, secular by the standards of their day, but still observant Jews. And they formed the basis of the Jewish community. Now, a secondly, much larger wave of Jewish immigration happened from the 1880s to the century. And the Jews that came out of Lithuania, they came from the little shtetl villages in Eastern Europe, Lithuania, Latvia, Poland. And they were a very different type of person to the original Jews that settled at that point. They were much poorer. They came with basically with the clothes on their back with very little, and people arrived because of gold and diamonds. The discovery of diamonds in Kimberley, and 20 years later the discovery of gold in Johannesburg, really changed the face of South Africa at the time, and this is contemporary South Africa today. Roughly at that time, about 25% of the Jewish population of Eastern Europe went to the New World. South Africa included. And of course we know that those that remained suffered the horrors of the Holocaust. But if you look at the communities, the Jewish communities in the New World, it was from those 25% of those people who left in the 19th century to make a new life for themselves. And that really forms the majority of what is today the forebears of this South African Jewish community. Whilst the first Jews were Anglo and German, and there's still many of those families here today. Over the subsequent generations, there's been an intermarriage between the two migrations, and a distinct South African Jewish identity has developed over these past 175 years. Many of the traditions taken from the Lithuanian Jews, the Litvaks that came here, but we are firmly based in a South African identity, not so much in an ex-Lithuanian identity, so to speak. This synagogue, now the entrance to the Jewish Museum, was the very first synagogue in sub-Saharan Africa. It was built in 1863, and it was a result of the community, the Jewish community in South Africa, reaching a point where they needed a place of worship that was specifically designed for its purpose. Prior to that, the community started about 175 years ago in 1841. There was a group of 17 Jewish men who were living in the Cape Colony at the time, and on Kol Nidre night, which is the night of Yom Kippur, the most holy day in the Jewish calendar, they decided to get together and have a prayer service. And out of that, the next day, they decided to form a formal Jewish community, a community, a congregation that would take care of Jewish rites of passage, births, marriages, and so on. They called that the Tikva Yisrael, the hope of Israel. And for the next 5-6 years, they would meet at the home of Benjamin Norden, who was one of the Jewish traders that happened to be in the city at the time. His initial meeting actually took place in his home as well, which is now part of the Mount Nelson complex. There was another building that they used as a synagogue prior to this one being built, but as I said, as the community became more established, they needed their own place of worship, and this synagogue was built in 1863. It is positioned right on the company gardens, which is really part of the oldest European settlement in South Africa, really. It was built on an Egyptian temple design, which, funnily enough, was not terribly uncommon at the time. The architects didn't have any real idea as to what a synagogue should be or could be, and to be honest, synagogues can be really any design. But it was taken from an Egyptian temple design, which was a tradition in religious buildings in architecture up to that point. And it seats probably, I'd say, about a congregation of roughly 300 probably in its heyday. It's a traditional Orthodox Jewish synagogue where men would have been seated downstairs, women would have been seated upstairs, and it was in service to the community for approximately 40 years. And what's important for us now, and why it's part of the South African Jewish Museum, is that it really represents the settling of roots in South Africa for the Jewish community. This is the symbolic laying down of a foundation of a community, and being part of the oldest part of Cape Town really shows that the Jews have been a part of certainly the European settlement of South Africa from really early on. This synagogue is very true to what it was, I would say. Very little has changed. We've taken out some of the seating, but some of the original seating still remains. What has changed dramatically with this building was with the building of the garden shul, which was the bigger version as the community grew, which is literally right next door. They needed additional space. So if you look at the structure of the building, they've actually cut away one side. If you can see behind me where these windows are, that would have been paralleled with the other side of the building, and it would have allowed for a section upstairs for women to sit, and the building would have been slightly wider. But in its essence, it remains exactly as it was. It's been adapted, obviously, for a museum. We've put some screens up in the wall, and the glass display cases you see behind me show the artifacts or items that are used in Jewish services and in religious artifacts that have been used in South Africa over the period of time. But they're positioned here. You wouldn't see them like this in a normal synagogue, but they're positioned here so visitors of the museum can understand a little bit about our religion, and they're obviously set according to the time of year. There's a chronological order to how they're represented. But other than that, this building is, for the most part, as it would have been 150 odd years ago. This is the very first Torah, the 5 books of Moses, the most religious item in Jewish history, or in Jewish religion, that was brought to South Africa. It was brought by a gentleman by the name of Aaron de Pas. He came in the early 19th century, and he was actually the commissioner of the Cape Province at the time. So amongst these items, there's this cup that was given to Dr. Siegfried Frankl, the first Orthodox or observant Jew to arrive in the Cape. This big cup over here was presented to Benjamin Norden when, after he had spent many years in the Cape, decided to return to England to retire. So he arrived with 1820 settlers, made his life in South Africa and retired back to England. And he was presented by the community with this silver cup, which was then bought back from England. It was and brought back here specifically to be part of the museum. Benjamin would then played a very important role with the development of our community, especially because it was him that called the very first congregational meeting, which was really just to pray on the most religious day of the year, Yom Kippur. But out of that prayer service, the genesis of the community began. If you look at the Aron Kodesh, or known as the Ark, it's the space within the synagogue where the Torah is kept. It's empty here in the museum because the shul has been deconsecrated, but all the original fittings. In the early part of the 20th century, they would have put in electricity, but other than that, it remains as it was. And above the ark, we have the original stained glass windows, and the design of the building means that they catch the light spectacularly. And visitors often stop in awe, I think, and really feel the spirituality of the space. The stained glass windows, the acoustics, the sense of history that is based in this building.
Welcome back. Pirkei Avot, or Ethics of Our Fathers, contains timeless wisdom and forms the basis of a collection of ethics, advice, and honesty. In our new series on Ethics of Our Fathers, Ray Perkel explains how this part of Jewish life was handed down to Moses at Mount Sinai.
The basis of the Jewish faith is the acceptance of the Torah as the blueprint for living appropriately in this world and for accomplishing the purpose of creation. And we can see that the Torah has two primary divisions. There's the written Torah, which is scripture, which is the 5 books of Moses and the prophets, and various other minor writings which comprise 24 books of the written Torah. And then there are 63 tractates of the Mishnah, which forms the foundation of the oral tradition, the oral Torah. And the two together comprise the foundations of Jewish life, but not only for Jewish life, it's the mandate which affects and impacts the entire world, because the purpose of the Jew in the world is, through fulfilling the objectives of the Torah, is to model a correct way of living that will influence mankind for the betterment of the world at large. And so it's not a contradiction to other religions. In fact, it's the foundation for other religions. The belief in one God is a primary axiom, and that's something that is mandated for all mankind. Now, when we look at the oral tradition, which is the subject of our discussion today, we see that there are 63 tractates of the oral tradition, 63 tractates of the Mishnah. That's what we call it, the Mishnah, which means the teaching. The interesting thing to observe is that 62 out of those 63 tractates deal with the do's and don'ts of life. And one of those tractates deals with ethics, with matters of the heart. And that's a very interesting thing. So why is that important? Because when it comes to ethical behavior, there are many people that understand innately the value of morality. Society can't function harmoniously and effectively and efficiently if we don't have the values of ethics and morality that bind us together with mutual respect for each other's property, with the whole idea of human rights, and as has been pointed out from the Jewish perspective, as important as human rights is human responsibilities. So we have an innate understanding that that is very important to us. But what we fail to understand is that the origin of ethics, coming from the human mind, or the instincts of human behavior are often very distorted in their effect. And we have very glaring examples throughout history where morality becomes relative to a particular culture or a particular philosophy of life or a particular milieu, and you then get conflicts of interest between different groups of people, different nations, different cultures, and so on. And the ultimate example of that, the most tragic and horrendous example, is what we found happening in the middle of the 20th century, where the morality of a particular culture imposed its value on that of others. So the 63rd tractate of the Mishnah, which we call Pirkei Avot, literally the chapters of the fathers, known commonly in English as the ethics of the fathers, this forms the basis of Jewish ethics. And what's quite fascinating to notice is how this tractate opens. It's got 6 chapters, and the first chapter begins with a very interesting statement. It says, Moshe kibel Torah miSinai. Moshe received the Torah from Mount Sinai. Now, why would a chapter on ethics need to tell us that? And the answer is very simple and profoundly significant. Is because ethics that are man-made are limited in their efficacy. What we need to realize, if ethics are going to hold and have universal effectiveness and acceptance and harmonize the various cultures, the vast diversity of cultures in the world with a singularity of truth that that relates and that is relatable to all human beings, we need to understand that it comes from beyond the human mind. Real, true, authentic ethics comes from God himself. So it's not only the do's and don'ts of correct behavior in the world in terms of how we conduct ourselves ritually and how we conduct ourselves in our day-to-day lives, but also the realization that when it comes to matters of the heart and attitudes towards one another as human beings, which is in fact outside the realm of legal obligation, not the do's and don'ts that we must or mustn't do, but matters of choice and matters of improvement and enhancement of our quality of life, that too comes from Sinai, from an origin which is divine and transcends the human mind. Then we can be guaranteed of success in our lives in the way that we harmonize with each other and bring into the diversity of human culture and into the diversity of human individuality on a micro scale as well as on a macro scale. We have harmony which has a quality of divinity to it, and that can only bring us good fortune and the fulfillment and success in our lives that we really desire.
Well, that's all we have for this week's episode of Simcha, a celebration of life. As always, we'd love to hear from you, so please send us a message on Facebook at Spirit Sister Productions. From me, Aaron Halevi, and the Simcha team, have a wonderful week ahead.